As a kid, yeah. All a nigga wanna have was a Burberry scarf and $3 in my pocket. Instead I got beat with a switch, but I don't give a fuck, but it's on my body. Scars all up on me, but I run around from everybody. Life lesson learned, I better learn from this bitch, nobody. She pushed me around, she didn't give no motherfucks about it. She broke my heart 3 times, but I ain't getting...
What is up, everybody? It's JT Sports Match, you guys, with another video. In this video, I'm here with my guy, Logan, part of the Man's Cave Sports Talk podcast, available on all podcast platforms. Logan's going to be on here giving us his 5 reasons why the Pittsburgh Steelers will be able to beat the Baltimore Ravens. Now, for those of you guys who haven't checked out my previous video, I already did one with my guy, Joe Newell, part of the Enough Ravens podcast, where he was on here explaining his 5 reasons why the Ravens will beat the Steelers. Have a Steelers guy on here giving his 5 reasons why the Steelers will defeat the Baltimore Ravens. So, Logan, how's it going today, man?
Man, I'm doing so well. I'm so honored to be here. I appreciate that you asked me to do this. And, yeah, man, I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm glad to have you on here, man. So let the people know before we begin where they can find your content at.
Yeah, man, so it's the Man Cave Sports Talk podcast. You can find me on anywhere you can find your podcasts. Anywhere you're listening to this right now, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much any platform. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at Logan D. Lorenzo, the Man Cave Sports Talk podcast as well.
So 5 reasons why the Pittsburgh Steelers will defeat the Baltimore Ravens. So when you look at the Steelers defeated the Tennessee Titans 27-24 last week. And it was kind of like a mixed bag, okay? Us as Steelers fans, we were okay to get the win. But when you take a deeper dive into it, the Steelers kind of fell apart in the second half of that game. The first half looks like the Steelers were going to run away with it. Then Tennessee climbed back. So, I mean, going into this game, what are the reasons on offense of why the Steelers would be able to pull off the victory against the Baltimore Ravens? Because the Steelers are surprisingly a 3.5-point underdog heading into this game, which is really surprising me. So, I mean, what offensively do the Pittsburgh Steelers need to do to win this game?
So I'll be honest, I was surprised when I saw that as well. Offensively, I think it starts up front. Right. Whenever you look at the Steelers and the Titans game, especially early on, we've talked about this several times. Winning the game starts with the battle of the trenches. Yep. So for me, this starts up front with our offensive line. So I think when you look at only allowing 8 sacks of Ben Roethlisberger so far this season, it's been outstanding as far as pass protection is concerned. We've had 100 yards rusher 3 out of the last 5 games. James Conner actually outrushed Derrick Henry last week. So when you start talking about our offense, I think it starts up front with the 5 big guys, the bigs, as Mike Tomlin likes to call them. And that's really where, as long as they're rolling, our offense is rolling. A lot of times we will, branch off of that run game and use some short passing game that is also like just a little branch off of our run game. It's still kind of considered a run in our offensive philosophy. So I think for me, it definitely starts up front with our offensive line, getting some movement, getting some protection for Big Ben, and minimizing the sacks like they've done all year.
Yeah, man. And up to this point, I believe this is pretty much the best defensive line that the Steelers are going to face all this season. They faced a pretty good one last week with Tennessee. They got the better of them for the majority of that game. Now, Baltimore, their defensive line was already good. You had Calais, you had Matthew Judon. Now they just recently traded for Yannick Ngakoue in the trade with the Minnesota Vikings. And Yannick Ngakoue has been having a pretty good season with the Vikings. I'm really surprised that they decided to trade him. So now you add him to the fold. And the Ravens are 5th in the NFL in sacks per game, which is a little bit of a coincidence because the Steelers' offensive line happens to be 5th in the NFL in sacks per game allowing the 5th least sacks in the NFL. So I really think that's going to be a really interesting matchup. And I think for Big Ben, like as a Steelers fan, I like Big Ben better when he's getting the ball out quick because like when you give Big Ben, it seems like too much time in the pocket. He gets a little bit too, at times, like, he just got to take a risk, man. And this is the most efficient season that Big Ben has had in pretty much his whole entire NFL career when it comes to limiting the turnovers. But last week, like we saw, if there is tight man-to-man coverage or just a tight window that Big Ben has to throw the football into, he does have the arm strength to get there. It's just that decision-making just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like last week, he threw the ball to Juju Smith-Schuster in the end zone, despite the fact that the whole Tennessee Titans defense was there, and it got intercepted. So what is the second reason why the Steelers will defeat the Baltimore Ravens?
So let me talk about that for a second too, because at that time I've heard a lot about this play. At that time of the game, here's why for me I don't mind him taking that shot. When you see that matchup, Juju on a linebacker, I totally understand that you want to go for the kill, and you want to take that shot in the end zone. If we score a touchdown right there, that game's out of reach, and me and you aren't sitting on the edge of our seats waiting for them to kick that, for them to kick that last field goal. Yeah. But of my five, switching gears, of my five, that was the only one I had on the offensive side of the ball. I think when we get that short passing game going, our offensive line is stout. When we get the run game going in James Conner, we bring Chase Claypool in that motion during the snap, not before the snap, during the snap, and it really pauses those linebackers, which is what's allowing us, giving us the time to have so much success, especially in the run game. So I think when you do that, you do a number of things. Not only do you give our offensive success, but you do something else, and you keep Lamar Jackson on the sideline. We really saw last week early on how that really paid dividends for the Steelers, was keeping Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill on the sidelines, especially in the first half. So if we can do that again here and really limit them, that's all I've really had on the offense. If I can give you my second point, it is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Is that okay?
Yeah, man.
All right, perfect. So the defensive side of the ball, it also starts up front for me, the Steelers' front seven. I think we proved last year when we didn't have Big Ben that we can stop this Baltimore Ravens offense. I think Lamar threw a career high of 3 interceptions in that game, and we didn't even have our starting quarterback in Ben. And that ties into my point that I just made was with keeping them off the field. So whenever you have a fresh defense finally who can come in and make plays, it all starts up front with the front seven, obviously being very high in the league in sacks again with TJ and Bud on the outsides. When you have an interior with Cam and Tuitt who can also get after the passer, I really think that when we apply pressure, we're going to be able to stop this run game, and that's going to force Lamar Jackson to be kind of like what we did to the Cleveland Browns a few weeks ago and kind of force Baker Mayfield to throw the ball and beat us that way. I see a very similar approach from our defense in this game. Focus on shutting down that run game, minimizing that run game, and then forcing Lamar to be one-dimensional and forcing him to throw the ball.
I think the thing with that, and this is what I was talking about in my preview. Now, we as Steelers fans believe that we can stop this run game in Baltimore because we stopped Cleveland, we stopped Tennessee. Those are 2 of the best running teams in the NFL. Well, here's where my concern with that lies. So the Ravens are the toughest running football team that we've gone to face this whole entire season, because not only do you have to stop these halfbacks with Mark Ingram, who is kind of banked up, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, you have to stop Lamar Jackson. And that's really difficult for a defense to do, because a lot of people say that Kansas City shut down the Ravens running game. That wasn't really necessarily true. Like, they shut it down because they were up by so big and Baltimore just completely abandoned the run. But Baltimore is still averaging like over 7.5 yards per carry. So for the Steelers, I think the game plan may be similar, but I think the assignments are kind of going to be a little bit different, because I think TJ Watt is predominantly going to have to stay out there on the edge. Sometimes we like to move him around a little bit. I think we're just going to have to keep him on the edge. And I do think that the reason why this game will be a little bit more difficult to stop this rushing attack with Lamar Jackson is the fact that we don't have Devin Bush. Now, albeit Devin Bush replacement, I can't remember his name right now, has played incredibly well. I mean, he got a big tackle on the goal line last week against Derrick Henry. But, I mean, I think Devin Bush not playing this game is going to have a really big impact, because when you look at the speed of Lamar Jackson being able to get out there to the edge, I'm not questioning TJ Watt's ability. It's just that sometimes Lamar Jackson is going to have those plays that he just goes ahead and he does break contain. But I do like those first 2 keys that you talked about, especially in the running game. Baltimore's their linebackers, Patrick Queen, he's been pretty okay, but he has had some inconsistent games like we saw against Kansas City. He really struggled in that game. So, I mean, for Pittsburgh, you're looking at a Ravens team that's averaging we're allowing opposing teams to run for 5.6 yards per carry every time they run the football. So that is most definitely a matchup that the Steelers can exploit. So what is your third reason of why the Steelers will be able to win this game?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with with everything you just said, especially in the run game with Lamar, because when you're trying to stop a run game traditionally, you traditionally don't have to account for the quarterback. So it's kind of your 11 players on defense versus their 10 players on offense now. And whenever you have to account for that quarterback, it now becomes 11 on 11, which definitely makes it a little bit more strenuous on us. Robert Spillane was the one who put the Mac down on Derrick Henry on the goal line, that hit. So my third point is going to be the Steelers special teams. When you look at what we did last week against Tennessee with Ray McCloud in the return game, giving us life, he is crazy stats. He has 18 yards per return in the punt game. He's had 2 of 50 yards or more. He almost broke two of those returns so far this year. He was down to the last guy, and he just got caught. So I fully expect him to have another big game in the return game. And what's been surprising for me is traditionally our kick coverage team has not been very good. It's been pretty suspect. We are, notorious for giving up a huge return, especially against the Ravens. I used to have nightmares of whenever Tomlin, came onto the field that time and stuck his leg out. So our kick coverage has not traditionally been good. This year, I think you've really seen a focus in that. You've seen us be able to have Boswell kick the ball high in the air and drop it inside the 5-yard line, which is giving our kick coverage team enough time to get down there and make a tackle. The Titans ended up bobbling one of those last week that we ended up pinning them back on the 10-yard line, and that ended up being big for us in the second half. So when you look at this Steelers special teams unit, we're getting it done in all 3 phases, but especially that special teams unit, man, I've been extremely impressed. Boz has only missed 1 extra point, and he's been perfect on field goals. So we finally have, Boz playing at a high level again where he can kind of compete with Justin Tucker. And this return game, I'm super excited about Ray McCloud. It lets Deontay Johnson take a break and not have to do that. That's just one thing that it takes off of his plate and lets him focus on being a receiver. And I just love the special teams, especially in this game, man.
Yeah, man, I agree with that. I think that's a pretty big one. And when you look at the way these Steelers and Ravens games always play out, they're not really necessarily always high scoring. The majority of the time, they're pretty low scoring. And the majority of the time, those games most definitely come down to field position, especially in a rivalry like this. And I do feel like the Steelers kind of have the advantage in the special teams department, aside from kicking, because we already know how great Justin Tucker is. But, I do think that special teams is a big reason why Pittsburgh can win this game. I mean, the Steelers special teams has been playing pretty lights out so far this season. So what's your last 2 reasons of why the Steelers would be able to win this game against the Baltimore Ravens?
So my last 2, my first one of the 2 tied into the Steelers' offensive game plan again. I kind of made those 2 points early on, but those were 2 separate for me. So definitely the Steelers' offensive game plan. I think we're going to be able to help our defense out by keeping Lamar on the sideline like we did in Tennessee. So just that point there. And then my last point, my 5th one, was the Steelers' secondary. I think outside of Hollywood Brown, there's Andrews scares me a little bit, but outside of Hollywood Brown, none of these Ravens receivers really scare me that much. I think we do have the ability to line up with these guys and man up with them. And I like a bounce back game from Minka coming off the Browns game and having his first interception, and especially when he returned it for a touchdown. I was kind of surprised that he played the way he did last week in Tennessee, especially in the second half. He had a big holding call on 4th and 1 in the end zone that allowed them to score another touchdown. So I fully expect him to bounce back big. I really like the way that Edmonds has been playing. You haven't heard too much about him this year. Usually Steelers fans are all over him, and I just love the crickets that I've been hearing because he's been playing really well. He's coming up and supporting the run well. He tackles well, and he hasn't been a liability in coverage. So yeah, I also like the fact –
I'm normally one that's always calling for Terrell Edmonds, saying, "Oh, man, he's a bust. Should have got somebody else." Yeah, I'm one of them.
Yeah, so right there, there you go. He's been playing well. You can't deny that. I'd still like to see him make a few more plays on the ball, but other than that, there's not too much more I can complain about, especially this year. And then when you look at the fact of Mike Hilton going to practice tomorrow, if he can come back and Mike Hilton can get back out there, I really love what he can do in the run game, coming off the edge as a blitzer. And Mike Hilton was one of the ones who was able to drop back in zone and confuse Lamar with disguising his coverage so well, and he ended up intercepting him last year. So I love getting Mike Hilton back. I think Cam Sutton played great in his place. So if we do end up playing a little bit of dime in this game, I feel super confident in Cam Sutton coming in. But I love the matchup for our secondary this week. I don't like, Mouse Boykin hasn't been that great. And outside of Hollywood Brown, none of those receivers truly scare me.
Yeah, man. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I think Pittsburgh can win this game. Pittsburgh stops the run. This defense is equipped to, just destroy this Ravens offense if they cannot run the football, because the Ravens are 27th in the NFL in sacks per game allowed. Last year, they only allowed 23 sacks in 16 games. This year, in 6 games that they played so far, they've allowed 15. And you look at how well our defensive line has played this year. We're the best defensive line in the NFL when it comes to being able to get pressure on the quarterback. And the Ravens' offensive line hasn't been great. And they are throwing for less than 200 yards per game through the air. So I really think that this is a matchup that if the Ravens cannot get the run game going and they have to throw the football to win this game, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And a lot of Ravens fans in my preview and prediction video agree with me. I said like this, look, the Ravens are not a balanced football team. If the run game's not going, they have to throw the football on Pittsburgh to win. They're not going to be able to do it. Now you got Mark Andrews. Okay, he scares me because Devin Bush isn't there. But I mean, if Minka Fitzpatrick can just play center field like he's been so good at doing for the most part of his Steeler career, and we can keep Hollywood Brown from having those big plays in the passing game, and we just completely shut down the Baltimore Ravens rushing attack, this could be a long afternoon for Baltimore, man. So I agree with the keys that you said, man. Logan, I appreciate you for coming on. Before we let you go, letting people know where they can find your podcast at one more time.
JT, I appreciate you, bro. This has been so much fun. I do like the Steelers to get this one done. I think in a combination of all those things, what you just said there, I was really surprised, real quick on the tight end thing. I was really surprised how well we were able to handle Jonnu Smith last week from the Titans. So that is one thing that gives me a little bit of confidence going into this game with Andrews. But absolutely, you guys can find me on any podcasting platform at the Man Cave Sports Talk Podcast. That's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you're listening or watching this right now. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at Logan DiLorenzo, the Man Cave Sports Talk Podcast. Thank you so much, man. This has been awesome.
We appreciate you for coming on, man.